We've talked about the official translation of the NCCA. We've talked about this three the projects of the three printing presses, LaSalle, Ateneo, and UP. We've talked about the Solidarity series. Then we've talked about the translation work being done by people involved in Pantayong Pananaw. But let's talk about the National Democrat translation practice within the National Democratic Front. So the translation practice within the NDF is part of what is now known as the Education and Culture Program of the NDF. It's a systematic practice. Now, what is interesting is it includes guidelines how to do translation. And this involved the country's best writers. Of course, the names cannot be revealed because the NDF is an underground movement. But it includes people who are either scholars, teachers, national artists, and so on and so forth. So let's look at the National Democratic Front. People may ask, what really is a National Democratic Front? So it's an alliance of several sectoral organizations, some of which were already in existence when martial law was declared and had to go underground, and some of which were formed after the declaration of martial law. So, since the National Democratic Front is an illegal organization, all these organizations are underground. So, the members of the NDF are Artista at Manunulat para sa Sambayanan, or Artists and Writers for the People, Christians for National Liberation, the Communist Party of the Philippines, the Cordillera People's Democratic Front, Katipunan ng mga Gurong Makabayan or Kaguma, or the Artists Organization, Kabataang Makabayan, or the Nationalist Youth, Katipunan ng Samahan ng mga Manggagawa is the Workers' Organization, Makabayang Kawaning Filipino, these are the government workers, Makabayang Samahang Pangkalusugan or health workers, Moro as Resistance and Liberation Organization, the Organization of Muslim People, the New People's Army, the Pambansang Katipunan ng mga Magbubukid, the Peasant Group, and the Revolutionary Council of Trade Unions, which is the group of the workers. Okay, so as you can see from the picture, there's a picture of Kabataang Makabayan, or the youth group, and this is a picture from the 60s. Okay, there's street art, meaning what? So people think, why are there so many literary works or visual works of art produced by the National Democratic Movement? And the answer is actually very simple, because this is organized creation, meaning that there is really an organization called Artista at Manunulat ng Sambayanan, which has members producing these works in an organized manner. Okay, so this is EDSA 1986. So if you look at, and people get confused about how these groups are aligned, but let me give an example. Let's pretend that you are a member of the youth group called Kabataang Makabayan. Then the youth group is part of the National Democratic Front, which in turn is part of the United Front, and which in turn is part of international movements. So, obviously, because of government campaigns to demonize the left, you would have many people who are thought to be members of these organizations who have suffered either from extrajudicial killings or forced disappearances. Now, why is this just important to know? Because it's important to know that the group that actually has the most clear-cut translation guide are the people from the National Democratic Front, because for two reasons. First, because this was developed from the 70s to the 80s, and second, because of the people who actually developed this in the 80s, 70s, and 90s, and that although their names cannot be revealed, these were actually the same kind of people who would be instrumental in the development of language and literature in the Philippines. Okay. Now, the gabay sa pagsasalin or translation guide, was actually published by the National Commission on Education and Propaganda in 1981. It was made by the Kawanihan sa Pagsasalin, or the Translation Committee, or KAUSA. And what we have now is actually the book entitled Kilusang Pambansa Demokratiko sa Wika, or National Democratic Movement in Language, by Monico Atienza. And this was published by the Sentro ng Wikang Filipino of the University of the Philippines in 1992. And this was his either his master's thesis or his doctoral dissertation. And Professor Atienza was since passed on, does a very comprehensive history of the experience of this translation committee. Okay, this is a picture of Professor Atienza, and the book won the National Book Award in Linguistics in 1992. Okay, so these were the texts that were translated, or that were first translated. First was the book Philippine Society and Devolution by Amado Guerrero, translated into Lipunan at Evolusyong Pilipino. Urgent Tasks, or mahigpit, was translated into Mahigpit Nating Mga Tungkulin. And Specific Characteristics of Our People's War was translated into mga partikular, and so there's a typo error there, nakatangian ng ating digmaang bayan. So, and then you have a fourth text, it's Revolutionary Guide to Land Reform, o Revolutionaryong Gabay sa Reforma sa Lupa. Now, according to this document by KAUSA, there are 2 points of view in translations. One is faithful translation, and which in Tagalog they refer to as madikit na salin. And second, there's free translation, or idiomatiko o malayang salin, ideas not words. And they say it depends on the nature of the text, and the text at hand sometimes calls for more katapatan or faithfulness. Now, why is this interesting, or why is this document by the National Democratic Front significant? Because this is the only document on how to translate that you have, right? So there's no other guidebook that you can find on how to do translation work. There's no textbook on how to do translation work. But you have this, okay? So, according to this book, what are the problems in translation that we find? First, texts in foreign languages bring with them also a foreign history and a foreign culture. Familiarity with English might lead the translator to produce a translation that can be understood only by those who can also understand English. Also, in translating from other Filipino languages, we might understand words that seem the same. What are the problems? So it's saying, so don't be overconfident. So that's what the document emphasizes. There are problems in translating documents originally written in German, Russian, or French, and using only the English translations. And that's why it's been important for some time now for cadres to kind of like study other languages so that they can translate directly from German or from Russian or French instead of using the English translations. And finally, you need comprehensive grammar and dictionary. Okay, so this is the framework according to the KAUSA. Okay? Mangyari mga revolusyonaryo tayo. Ang ating sikap, tiyaga at sining ay nakalaan sa pagsisilbi sa mamamayan. What does it mean? Because we are revolutionaries, everything that we do, our craft, our hard work, is all to serve the people. Pag pinag-aaralan nating mabutit pinauunlad ang lengguwahe ng masa, saka ginagawa itong bihikulong maghahatid sa kanila ng mapagpalayang kaalaman mula sa teorya at praktika ng revolusyong proletaryo sa daigdig. We study and develop the language of the masses, and we use this as a vehicle to bring to them the liberating knowledge from theory and practice of the revolutionary proletariat of the world. So I'm just translating. So ito ang ating maliit ngunit di makaliligtaang ambag sa Revolusyong Pilipino. These are small but unforgotten contribution to the Philippine Revolution. So according to KAUSA, this is what we should do if you are a translator. So first, read all of the text before you start to translate. Second, create a lexicon or standard vocabulary. For example, and this is the lexicon of the National Democratic Front. National Democratic should be translated into Pambansa Demokratiko. Historical materialism is materialismong historiko, not historical. Okay, historiko. To struggle is makibaka. Also, use a good dictionary. The first draft should be made by a comrade. Then what should you do? The text should be discussed by a group of people. Next, read one sentence aloud while looking at the original so the others can make suggestions. Next, revise up to 4 times. Next, study idioms. For example, to start from scratch. Okay? Do not translate literally. Do not say magsimula sa kahig. Kahig is scratch. It should be magsimula sa wala. Next, milking cow. Not too many cows in the Philippines. So you don't say gatasan. Instead, what is more popular? Rice. So you say palabigasa, not gatasan. So for example, siren song, right? Don't say awit sirena, even if sirena is mermaid. You say awit adarna. And what's adarna? Adarna is a mythical bird. So that's the translation of the idiomatic expression siren song. Okay. So, if you now look at contemporary translation and diaspora nationalism, it's now important for organizations such as Bayan USA, Migrante, Anak Bayan, and you look at indigenous traditions as acts of decolonization, and it's important to look at translation as we write in Filipino in diaspora. So these are just like pictures of students going to the Philippines. Then you have a lot of people getting tattoos, even if the tattoos are not so accurate. So this is supposedly mahal kitab, it's a little bit wrong. So it's important to study the Baybayin script. So for example, this is an example of the Baybayin script found in the Laguna copperplate inscription. Remember, so it was, and I talked about this in a previous lecture, the Laguna copperplate was significant, or it continues to be significant, because it's supposedly something that was made in the 9th century, right? So, and we know it's Filipino, not Javanese, because of the system of hammering into cold copper. It was a pardon from the king of Tondo, and then it's just about what's this? It's really about the pardon given to a family for the debt that they had. Okay, so you would have pictures, for example, of using the letter K, for example, but the Anak Bayan in this looks like a New York, New Jersey picture. They have to use the letter K. So I'm moving on now. So that's the whole history of translation work in the Philippines and why translation work is important even in sites of migration such as the United States.